Hi, how are you? Welcome back to my reading corner. Grab yourself a comfy blanket or a comfy pillow or both, and let's dig in. So, we've been reading When the Dandelions Sing, and today we're on chapter 2. Chapter 2, A Legend. Granddad had been born in the same exact town we now live in, Red Creek, Pennsylvania. In the same area we are staying in now, to be exact. 1701 Old Spruce Drive was our address. In the summer of 1918, there was a pandemic known as the Spanish flu, and it would cause crazy mess throughout the entire world. And sadly, it didn't miss the old dusty country town of Red Creek. Families were completely wiped out, decimated, and people's lives were changed forever. Granddad told me once that his mama had been really sick while carrying him, and that she had gone to God just after he was brought into this new world. I asked him why God had taken her, and not someone else's mama, and he would just say that lots of mamas had gone together. That maybe God decided he needed the best ones up there to take care of all those little kids that were going home as well. It was a tough time, and Granddad didn't remember too much about that all, except for the stories his own daddy told to him. Or maybe he just didn't like to think back on them. "Do you miss your mama?" I asked. Granddad would look at me with his warm brown eyes, and somehow he understood my curiosity wasn't meant to pry or to open old wounds, but to understand better. He would gently pick me up with his massive, strong hands, place me on his lap, and tell me the stories of how he had grown up, and no matter how often he told me the story, I listened intently. Each time I felt I learned something different, or heard a distinct word I didn't hear the last time, or saw a different look of emotion on Granddad's face. Sometimes he would look as if he were thinking back to that old time, and his expression would be one of getting lost in the story he was narrating, while others he would be more interested in my expressions and reactions to what he said. Granddad was the type of man who always took his time to explain things with great detail, because he knew the smallest details were more important to me than the actual story. He enjoyed that about me. I would sit on his lap and just stare at him as he told his stories, and I would imagine myself as someone in each of his tales. When he talked about the time he was born, I would think back to when my mama had me, and how she told me she had almost not made it through that day. What if she had not made it through? What if I had come into this world on that cold February night and she had died? Would I be still sad? Was my granddad sad that his mama left him? Or had he always been brave? I didn't know, but still, I always listened. By the time I was a little boy, Granddad was graying. Not just his hair either, but his skin too. He was strong, but he was feeling the effects of growing up as he had, working whatever jobs he could find until the steel plant had come calling. His hair was thinning and receding a little more each year, and his smile caused his face to exhibit more crevices than it had the story before. As he'd tell me stories, I'd study the lines on his face, deep like the paths carved into the mountain by the water near Potter's Trail, just north of home. We hiked there, and Granddad told me about adventures he and the boys took, running through the caverns and splashing in the creek down below the valley. We never understood why other boys in different towns called it a creek. Creeks were bigger. This was, in fact, a crick. Those were, as he told it, the best times of his youth, and he thought of them often. His hands were powerful from moving heavy steel around for decades, and they showed dark brown spots and soaked blue veins that were hard to miss. He was tall, but now slightly hunched over, seemingly not the great giant he once was. All in all, he was still imposing, if only because of the stories people told about him. I was unsure if they were more legend than reality, but he was my granddad, and when I was out with him, I felt 10 feet tall. I walked with my head higher and my chest puffed out a bit more. Everyone went out of their way to greet him, and subsequently, me. I was always proud to be his sidekick on our trips into town. When Granddad's mother passed, Auntie Clara Dell moved in to help take care of things around the house. She had no children of her own and had never been married either. She was a plump, loud character, as Granddad explained her to me while smirking. She was always smiling and laughing empathetically, even when nothing was particularly funny. She found good and humor in just about everything around her. It wasn't that she had not wanted to get married and have children of her own. She just didn't ever get around to it. For years, she taught school in the next town over, and those students felt like her own. She would read every evening after supper and never found much time to find a suitor. He told me she was a happy person, though, regardless, and figured she had bigger things to do and enjoyed giving to others. So naturally, when her brother came calling for help, she found purpose and knew it was what she was intended to do. It was a natural progression for her. Even though she had no children of her own, her brother needed her, and she would need no time to think things over. She sold her one-bedroom home, packed just enough of what she would need, and moved across the town border into Red Creek and settled in. Grammy was not from Pennsylvania. She was never supposed to be here at all. She was born Mildred Elizabeth Hale, down south, just outside of a town now known as Peachtree City, Georgia, on a family farm that sold tobacco to larger farms. She had it rough, and her parents had divorced early on, leaving her mama with her and her 6 siblings alone. Grammy moved to Pennsylvania when her own mama met a man traveling through the state of Georgia on his way to Ohio in search of work by the waterways of Lake Erie. They quickly connected and fell in love, leading them to travel north together, with all the kids in tow, to a new life in an area foreign to them both. They would need to pack light and trust that each would help the other through the transition. They put everything they had in their faith in each other and hope for the best. When they stopped over in Pennsylvania on their plotted out course, one of Granny's brothers came down with tuberculosis and couldn't go on further. He fell sick quickly and had to rest. They found a small shanty to rent temporarily, and her new husband found local work to provide supper for the family and to pay the rent until they could finish their journey. Years passed, and they never made it to Ohio. Life would start over for them in Red Creek, and they would make this home for good as best they could. Grammy and Granddad met at a small general store on the corner of Haw and Blue Ridge Roads. Granddad drove me there once and showed me where it had been. Instead of the store he fondly remembered, there stood a larger store with bright blue and white lights, and the uneven dirt sidewalks had been replaced with solid, smooth concrete. The once quiet area was bustling with cars and people all about. I had known no different, but Granddad seemed to be let down a bit. He missed the way it had been, the way his life was vastly simpler, and the energy he once had. I think Granddad felt he could have done so much more with his time, and that he had let life pass by him without realizing it. Often I would see him stop his old rusting red Chevy pickup, look over to a spot where something new was in place of something old, and talk about what once stood there proudly many years before. His eyes would get fixed on what seemed like nothing, and he would gaze and just sit forward, peeking through the dirty windshield to what was in front of him. I would ask him what he was looking at, but he wasn't listening by that point. He was in a different time, a different era that had long since passed him by, but he was still there. He had an ability to get lost and reminisce about what he once had and how he would give just about anything to go back to that last lost time in his life. In those moments, it was as if he was back there, living in that olden time, searching for something he once held so dear to his heart. They married in the summer of 1936, when Grammy was just 17 years old. They moved to a second-floor apartment building over top of Red Creek's country store and supplies, the same general store that they had met in several years prior. Granddad was working as a carpenter with his uncle, but then a friend of his, John B. Rogers, had told him he could get him a job working next to him at the steel plant. Because of his broad shoulders and naturally big stature, he would be a shoo-in for sure. They would likely hire him on the spot, and that is exactly how it happened. He was hired immediately and started his new life as a steel worker for Stapleton Brothers Steelworks. Meanwhile, Grammy was at home, tending to their tiny but cozy one-bedroom apartment, honing her cooking skills, and trying to provide a nice place for Granddad to come home to after the long days in the steel plant. When Grammy had her first child, a boy, Granddad had just shy of a full year under his belt at the plant, so money was still extremely tight. He looked for extra hours, trying to get noticed for his hard work ethic, and eventually he secured more overtime. This caused a dilemma at home, though, because Grammy didn't get to see her new husband much during the week at all, and she would sit with her newborn son, William, and dream of the days when Granddad earned enough to come home at a reasonable hour for supper, like so many other husbands could do. Granddad was a tough, hard-working man, and although he felt his wife's anguish for certain, he knew he needed to work hard if he wanted to be successful in life and give their family a better chance to get ahead. Being raised by his aunt had taught him a lot of valuable lessons, one of which was to chase after dreams a little bit harder, because time wouldn't slow down just because you needed it to or wanted it to. No, sir. Time would simply feel as if it were passing by faster and faster, until you were old enough to have raised children of your own, retire, and while smoking a tobacco pipe on the front covered porch of the home you had worked hard to pay off, look back with pride at all you'd accomplished. Granddad dreamt of this, and of grandkids playing in the front yard while he rocked and puffed away on his pipe, his wife by his side, and a pitcher of iced lemonade on the table. That was certainly a different ending than the one he'd actually created, but time had just simply gotten away from him while he was busy chasing after his goals. When the Great War arrived and Pearl Harbor was attacked, surprisingly, many young men saw a different future than the one they'd planned. They saw one where their freedom was threatened, one where tyrants ruled over them with an iron fist, telling them how to act and what to do. That didn't sit well with them. They were hard-working countrymen with values and morals, and when the time came to fight, fighting is exactly what they did. Proudly, they enlisted one after the other, without a moment's hesitation. Granddad was among those who joined the army, and during the spring of 1942, he was headed overseas to fight in a war that meant more to everyone back home than it did at any other time in history. This is how he saw it anyway. The Japs had invaded our home soil, threatened the families we loved, our freedoms, and our way of life. They weren't going to take that without a good old country boy fight, he said. During one firefight, Granddad had a shell go off close enough that the dirt covered his body up to his neck, keeping him from being able to dig himself out, and panic set in. 2 men from his platoon quickly came to help him, and despite the constant barrage of fire flinging by like lightning bugs illuminating a wheat field, they dug him out, and Granddad continued the fight. He was a tough old backwoods country boy, and Grammy would say, You couldn't keep that man down for nothing, she told us. When the Great War ended, a smaller number of boys returned to Red Creek than had gone over. The little town had lost a great deal of its boys, and women quickly became widows. Pride had meant little to these families without fathers. Children, some who had never ever met their daddies, had no way of understanding what happened. For Grammy, she was just happy that her husband had returned, and he promised he would in one piece. He was a little different, though, a little more tense, a little more unaware of the family, and a little more restless. Granddad's job at the steel plant was waiting for him when he came home, and he worked long hours again. After work was finished for the day, he would stop on the way home for a beer with the boys and talk about the war, the steel plant, the weather. Then one beer would turn into two, and two to three. Eventually, Grammy would need to take his wallet, remove all of his cash he had stuffed inside, and place it back in his pocket before he left in the morning for work. After a few times of embarrassment, she would relent and leave enough for a drink or two if he promised to come home right after. Excuse me. She knew he was dealing with something she couldn't understand, but she was as well. It was her responsibility to take care of the house, clean up, cook the food, tend to the kids, wash the clothes, pay the bills. She was wearing thin, and their relationship was suffering deeply. One night, Granddad stayed out a little longer than expected, and Grammy was worried more than usual. He had been good and honored his 1 to 2 drink promise he had made her. She didn't think he was out drinking more. She couldn't leave because she now had 3 children at home and was pregnant with number 4. So she went down the hall over to where Mrs. Talbot lived and asked if her husband would mind walking the four blocks to the bar to retrieve her husband and bring him back home. Mrs. Talbot knew the McFarlands well. She knew they were decent folks. Honey, you just wait right here. I'll fetch the mister and have him run down straight away to see if we can rustle up old Walter for you. Walter, or Granddad, went by Walt, but Mrs. Talbot had a bad time remembering the names people preferred, and so she just never reminded her after a while. He would just have to be Walter to her. But no other person dared go against his wishes. He was just plain old Walt. Mrs. Talbot was a shorter, older woman, slightly round and unassuming. His face was soft, and he wore tiny wire-rimmed glasses, as he could not see more than 3 feet in front of him. He was a quiet man, allowing Mrs. Talbot to do most of the talking for them, but he had a big, soft heart. Mr. Talbot put on his heavy navy blue coat, wrapped a soft tan scarf around his neck, kissed Mrs. Talbot on her rosy cheek without even raising his eyes to meet hers, and set out into the dim hall, down the stairs, and out the door to the waiting street. As soon as he did, Mrs. Talbot told Grammy to hang tight, and she would throw a pot of Oriental tea on, so that by the time they were finished drinking it, old Walter and Mr. Talbot would be back on their way up the stairs, and all would be right again. As they sat there sipping on hot tea, Grammy calmed down some, and she and Mrs. Talbot talked about the frigid cold, how the people of the town were adapting to the growing population boom, and how they were glad the war was over. Grammy was a smart, understanding woman, and she understood Granddad had a lot of trauma dancing around in his head from what he experienced from what he had experienced while fighting in a land he knew nothing about, or had ever even heard of, for that matter, before he deployed. He once told her he was not so worried about the boys that didn't come home as much as he was for the ones who had. Oh, he was sad at the loss and knew the families would suffer for a long time to come, missing and aching for the husbands, sons, and fathers they lost. The boys who came back, though, had seen what he had seen, and for them their minds were not the same as when they had left. They viewed life and circumstances in a very different way now, a way haunted with the memories of what they had seen and done. Once, when he was picking up some split apple wood for the fireplace, a man chopping more wood nearby inadvertently dropped the axe onto a metal plate, causing a loud bang. Granddad hit the ground in a frantic manner, looking feverishly all around and screaming for the other men to hit the deck as well. It wasn't until a few moments later that he realized where he was and what was going on. The men said nothing because they just knew. Most had either been where Granddad was or knew someone close that had. Many had relatives and friends that had not returned at all. It was an unspoken understanding, and when Granddad realized what he was doing, he got up, embarrassed and confused, shook off the damp dirt from his shirt and jacket, and walked over to the man. He paid him, never looking at him directly, and apologized. The man quickly said, "Walt, no need to say anything, friend. I didn't see a thing. See you next week, big guy." That was enough to get Granddad through what he had just felt. That war had more lasting effects than anyone could have expected, including my big old granddad. And that's the end of chapter 2. I do hope you'll come back tomorrow for the next chapter. I hope you have a great night. And as always, love, Nan. Bye.